Hello, my name's David Bruce. For composers like me, a premiere is something of a big deal. It's usually the result of months of hard work. So the recent string quartet of mine, which had its European premiere at the Concertgebouw in Amsterdam a few days ago, was just 20 minutes long. But it took me a solid year to write it. I went through a bunch of different sketches, I tried it out with the quartet, and I actually threw away 2 whole movements before starting again. So it was a lot of work. So you can imagine it feels a bit annoying when you check the website announcing the premiere. And how is it advertised? Mozart, Brahms, and More. One of the composers seems to have mysteriously vanished. I joked on Twitter that I should change my name to More, and somebody rightly pointed out that people often ask for more at the end of a concert, so it might not be a bad idea. But this is actually not a particularly unusual set of events, and it's happened to me more times than you might imagine. The New Yorker columnist Alex Ross picked out a whole bunch of examples where works by a living composer are left off the billing, even when the composer themselves is taking part in the concert, including, for example, Esa-Pekka Salonen, who is a very well-known composer and conductor. He was conducting a premiere of his own piece, Castor, with the LA Phil, who, by the way, are considered one of the most forward-thinking classical music institutions in the world. So why, when they advertised the concert, was it billed as Salonen conducts Tchaikovsky and Bartók? And similarly, John Adams, one of the most prominent and well-known contemporary composers, conducting his own new violin concerto, Scheherazade Point 2, with the Cincinnati Symphony, was promoted as John Adams conducts The Pines of Rome, suggesting that the draw of that fairly conservative Respighi piece would outweigh that of seeing the living composer conducting his own work. And that, of course, is exactly why this is happening. Institutions fear, or more often know from bitter experience, that new pieces by living composers will just put people off coming. Why advertise something that will reduce ticket sales? So perhaps it's just the fault of us composers for writing such intimidating, unfriendly music for the past 100 years or so. And yet, aren't there plenty of places where this isn't an issue? Aren't there places where entire programmes of new music sell just fine? So perhaps what we're talking about is just that some of these places, or the people who programme concerts in them, are a bit backward thinking in their attitudes. Well, this is something I'm reluctant to accept, particularly given that in the case of Mirjam Wiesenbeek, who is the head of programming for the small hall at the Concertgebouw, that it was her who helped co-commission my new piece and bring it to the hall. To me, she seems really passionate about contemporary music.
As the Concertgebouw, we have a composer residence, for instance. And for instance, this season we have Thomas Larcher, a fantastic Austrian composer, and he'll be here for 3 months and live in Amsterdam. We've introduced him in a concert. You know, we really celebrate him, and we really celebrate the fact that he's here, and his music is absolutely fantastic. You know, for instance, in the Netherlands, it's a fantastic country for contemporary music. Even in Amsterdam, there's this wonderful hall, the Muziekgebouw aan het IJ. We have festivals like November Music and Gaudeamus. There's lots of interest. So I think there are really a lot of stages also and festivals where the contemporary music living composers are so important and really attract audience. I mean, that's clear, and I also enjoy these festivals a lot.
Of course, a hall like the Concertgebouw comes with a sense of history attached. It's hard to be hip and cool in a place built with classical arches and columns, and with the names of great composers emblazoned around the walls of the concert hall, and some not so great. But maybe being hip isn't necessarily the goal here.
I think also the building being the way it is actually, I find, is one of the strengths. You know, it's really, you enter this building and you feel history. You feel history, every step you take, every seat you're on. You can feel that it is, that lots of musicians have passed, have been there, composers. And for instance, we have this Mahler festival coming up in May. And sometimes I tell people that Mahler was actually here, conducting his own symphonies. And even in the recital hall where I program chamber music, if you look in the archives, you can find names like Prokofiev, Stravinsky, Ravel, Milhaud, Britten. These composers played in that hall actually and played their own music. We've accepted this music as core classical late romantic music. But all these pieces were premiered there, on the same spot.
We also shouldn't jump to conclusions that an old-fashioned building is what causes the problem with new music. The LA Phil, where that Esa-Pekka Salonen piece was left off the billing, have one of the coolest concert halls in the world, the Walt Disney Hall. So in the case of the Concertgebouw, you've got a forward-thinking head of programming, you've got a radical acceptance of new music stretching back to Mahler's time, so we're still struggling to see why it feels the need to be coy about new composers. The nearest I can come to an answer is to say that maybe certain halls or certain series within those halls have a long-standing core audience who is more traditional. So however hip the venue is, the audience who attends the symphony orchestra concert at the LA Phil will inevitably be more traditional in its tastes than the one that attends, say, their Green Umbrella series of contemporary works. And similarly, the audience that attends chamber music concerts at the Concertgebouw will also tend to be more traditional. Wiesenbeek seems to be trying to play to the strengths of her venue. She'll never compete with those other cooler venues around Amsterdam, but that doesn't mean she wants it to sit back and just become a museum of old music.
Yes, keeping an audience is important, but also not repeating Beethoven quartets for the next century is also important. So, and to specify that we will, of course, repeat the Beethoven quartets. But I keep in the back of my head, so all these Beethoven quartets were premiered at one point, and these late quartets were, received as quite complicated, and he also needed the audience to grow and to evolve, and be able to understand what he was saying. So in that sense, I feel almost obliged to keep the tradition going, but then so how to publish it with an audience that is really really comfortable coming to something they know or recognize or know what they buy their tickets for. So if we have Mozart, Brahms, and more, I think it was a very in a good way trying to say come to the recital hall and be surprised. I think that could have been the mindset. Because Beethoven, Mozart or Brahms, but we also have this lovely surprise. Okay, should we have said Mozart, Bruce, Brahms? Yes, it could have been probably the same effect. So
I was saying you should have said come for Bruce and two older guys as well.
Well, it's inspiring. I'll note this. Yes.
I am, of course, incredibly grateful to Miriam Wiesenbeek for getting the hall to co-commission my new piece, but also for being willing to talk openly about this topic, which you can imagine could be a bit uncomfortable for her. The fact is, it's a complicated problem that she's certainly not the cause of, and certainly not alone in facing. But I think as long as we're talking openly about it, the battle is already half won. So stay tuned for more about my new piece, which the Dover Quartet premiered at the Concertgebouw. It's called The Lick Quartet. It's a piece which I like to think, after years of memes, finally takes the lick seriously. And speaking of living composers, thank you so much to those of you who have already responded to my call for composers, which I put out on Instagram and Twitter. Please check my accounts there if you want to know more. I probably won't manage to respond personally to everyone, but please know that I'd like to do many more projects involving all kinds of composers in all kinds of ways. So even if I can't see an immediate use for you, I'll be keeping everyone's submissions on file for future reference. I have to say, I know the phrase "I'm humbled" is a bit corny, but seeing so many of you sending me your music from all over the world and seeing you talk about what drives you musically is a genuinely humbling experience for me. So thank you to everyone who's already applied, and I'll be keeping the email open indefinitely, so whenever you're ready, do send something through. So no deadline, no age limit, and despite the willful misreading of my post from some commentators, I will be accepting applications from white males. I'd just like to encourage applications from a diverse range of cultures and backgrounds, which is Probably how I should have phrased it originally. Thank you to all my patrons on Patreon for supporting the channel and allowing projects like the Five Composers project to happen. You're really crucial to the channel's survival. I can't thank you enough. If you have any thoughts on this missing composer effect, do let me know in the comments. Thank you so much for watching, and I'll see you next time.